how the hell do I install a freaking Apogee Thunderbolt driver into a Elgato Thunderbolt port?
Go back to that Reddit post you were looking at.
But it's on Gearspace, previously known as Gear Beep.
Folks, if you notice a little bit of like anger sort of radiating from our recording today, it's because we had some studio issues and we had to install some ancient drivers on Raf's MacBook.
Yeah, we're about to talk about like a stock market / global hegemon meltdown due to advanced AI. But before we do, in order to do that, we had to install a 10-year-old driver, audio driver,
and USB hub
that is plugged in via Thunderbolt to a Thunderbolt hub that both require drivers, but on like the latest M4 Max MacBook.
But this is good because we're going to talk about the freakout about DeepSeek, which we sort of teased last week. A lot of people have been pleading for us to talk about DeepSeek. And we're coming in a little bit angry because we've just been navigating fucking gearsluts.com.
You have to install drivers twice now, sometimes. And literally, like, the guy's like, I'm from Apogee. Here's the links to the things. Uninstall 3.5, install 3.0, then install it again.
Back in my day, you only had to install software once. So, honestly, China, wipe us out. The mantle of heaven, we've not managed it well. Okay, we're going to talk about what this episode is really about. As I said, yes, DeepSeek, the Chinese AI challenger.
Yeah.
Now, last week, we talked about it, and full mea culpa, cards on the table, we evidently did not treat it with the gravity with which it deserved.
Okay, so to give us more credit, we did say, like, wow, they really seem to have made a model here, which is very good and seems to run on little inference. That's going to have implications for, in particular, the $500 billion OpenAI, etc. project. What we didn't see coming, though, was, about 4 days later or so. Although after we released it, probably like 24 to 48 hours after we released the episode.
Over the weekend, there was a meltdown.
An absolute freak out of epic proportions.
A geopolitical meltdown.
It wiped $1 trillion off the global stock market.
It was the biggest single-day loss of value on the US stock market ever.
560 billion wiped off Nvidia, which is the largest drop ever.
Yep. And if you spent any time on X over the weekend and early into this week, you would have seen a complete meltdown of like cope.
Yes, and
from American AI developers, basically.
We picked up on everything that they melted down over, and instead of melting down, we tried to ask it to talk about the Chinese Communist Party's view on Tiananmen Square in a Jamaican patois accent.
Exactly. So we were chill. While everyone else was freaking out about geopolitics, great power struggles, we were chilling out and being objective and asking the questions that everyone wanted to know.
But anyway, it's probably time to do a deeper dive
into DeepSeek.
So last week, obviously, we explained what it was and mentioned that it was good and showed some on-the-fly, some of its reasoning capabilities. But DeepSeek, James, you're the one who's the journo.
Yeah, okay.
Who are they? Who made it?
Just to give you a run-through. So, picking up from kind of what we talked about last week, DeepSeek is a Chinese AI lab.
Yeah. Like OpenAI, who makes ChatGPT.
Like OpenAI.
Like Anthropic, that makes Claude.
That's right.
Like Google, who makes Gemini.
Yep. But based in Hangzhou, it is owned entirely and operates within a Chinese hedge fund named High Flyer, which is founded by a dude named Lang Wenfeng. And the story goes is that, he ran this quite successful Chinese hedge fund, quantitative trading firm.
And quants, which is this is using algorithms and high frequency trading, etc., and AI in order to kind of let computers predict things based on order flows and blah, 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 blah.
Yeah, without getting too far into it, they are why you will never be able to win on the stock market.
There is no alpha.
There's no alpha because insanely precise algorithms run on 5 million fucking NVIDIA chips built by people who are several standard deviations of IQ above you.
Yeah.
An insurmountable gap.
And work 3 to 4 times harder than you.
They're slurping up all that alpha, leaving you to get 6% gains on an index fund every year. Max. In a good year. Anyway, I didn't mean to give you the black pill at this time of day. Anyway, so yes, the story goes is that this guy acquired a bunch of NVIDIA chips for his quant trading firm, for his hedge fund, and decided this AI stuff looks pretty good. I'm going to put these NVIDIA H800s,
H800s, the nerfed NVIDIA chips.
The nerfed NVIDIA chips. I'm going to put them to work on some of this AI palaver.
There's a bit of hearsay, not sure if true, but it is true that the CCP at a certain point a couple of years ago didn't look fondly upon these like high frequency traders and these quant firms that were just extracting money without actually creating value.
Xi Jinping does not like software, is also another thing to add on top.
Yeah.
He loves like tangible industrial products, but it's well known that he is like AI, software, e-commerce, gaming. All of this stuff is not in line with Maoist thought. It's not good for China. And he's probably taking his foot off the brake a little bit with the AI stuff now that it's become a great power conflict.
Yeah.
But fundamentally, he's not a fan.
Yeah, but the kind of line of talk goes that Xi and the CCP were basically like, no more quant trading. If you're smart, stop that shit.
Yep.
Do something else.
Yep.
And that is what they did. Yeah, whether that's like whether the pressure came or not, look, we'll never know. We'll never know.
We'll never know.
But point being, they stopped making heaps of money on the stock market and decided to use the technology that they'd already kind of built, which, like, when you think about it, it's about making, like, in minutia of a second, like, trying to get an edge for, like, 0.0001 of a second, like, highly optimized algorithms and speed and whatever. Apply that to making an LLM or an AI model. They started doing that 18 months ago. We are now 18 months in the future.
That's right. So one thing that I will kind of call out as well, the release of the latest DeepSeek model has been described as like a Sputnik moment for America, with Sputnik moment obviously being when Russia sent a space shuttle into orbit and America was like, oh shit.
They got cosmonauts up there.
The Russians they're cooking something over there, and that, you know, accelerated the space race and America eventually won. China actually had their own moment like that, which was when ChatGPT dropped, basically. They were like, oh shit, the West has this unbelievably popular and powerful consumer application and we haven't got jack shit.
Yeah, and they got more resources and, you know, more money.
This could be the future of how, you know, everything is organized, maybe, and we've got nothing. So they've been on a sprint, many different AI labs in China trying to make stuff work. DeepSeek has actually been releasing models. This is version 3, the version that came out a couple of weeks ago. But they have been releasing other models. And, you know, people who are deep in the AI ecosystem, every time they've released, you know, V1, V2, have been like, oh, wow, these guys are doing some interesting stuff.
Yeah, these guys are cooking.
Generally, nobody was using it or knew it. It was just the real heads that were into it. Anyway, V3 was actually released a few weeks ago. Again, got that burst of attention when everyone was like, oh, this is actually like a GPT-4 class model come out of a Chinese lab, and allegedly they've trained it using less resources. That's kind of fun. But it certainly didn't start a market panic. It didn't cause the freak out that we're observing now. What seems to have pushed it over the edge is that they released DeepSeek R1, which is their reasoning model, like OpenAI's O1.
Yeah, that's the one I installed last week that we were quoting from.
We're digging around with, which, you know, is the one that has these long, visible chains of thought. It can reason. They dropped that, and it's like literally a fraction of the processing power and cost of OpenAI's O1. I think
allegedly it was trained on $5.5 million, which is 1% of the cost of OpenAI, and inference is 3% of the cost.
The inference is what I was talking about. But yes, they claim, and just to put it out in the air, the $5.5 million training cost that they talk about, that doesn't include salaries. That doesn't include
R&D. Like
research.
Doesn't include like research on GPUs before. It's like for this one specific model, once they press go on train, the amount of GPU minutes that they bought equates to around $5.5 million.
Yeah. So just to clear the air on that, But the point
you can't build one. You can't just be like, I'm going to build AI model now. Here's $5.5 million. Give me model.
Yeah. So there's a few other extraneous costs there that went into R&D and what have you. They clearly have a very deep bench of talent that's working.
Well, you said that a week ago, and it's even more true today. So you're vindicated.
Yeah. So when we did this episode last Wednesday before the freakout, we were like, this is a good model, you know. But I think people started to really put it through its paces for software development work and all different other heavy-duty tasks over the weekend, pretty much.
Yeah.
And word spread, and people were like, this is actually like a really good model. Yeah. And it is like a fraction of the cost of OpenAI products.
I mean, and crucially, if you go to their website, the free version, like literally you can just, they don't even have like a subscription model. No. Like the free version.
You go to chat.deepseek.com.
And it's like better than ChatGPT.
Yeah.
For free.
For free users. Yeah, absolutely.
Like for free users, I mean, yeah, like, so for most people, if you're like a student or maybe you're from a country that can't afford to spend, you know, $30 or whatever it is, a month on a premium thing, then you immediately are like, wait, hold on, I get basically as good as O1, which is a pro model on ChatGPT, for free.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, it's an absolute no-brainer. Not only that, I would argue that it's better than that, because with ChatGPT, if you want to use their reasoning models, when we talk about reasoning, we're talking about it thinks about things and, you know, talks to itself, basically pre-prompts itself. Here's all the details. How do I think through this? Now I'm going to deliver the response. On ChatGPT, you can't browse the internet and use a reasoning model. So you can either choose to like, go and search the internet and then, you know, use retrieval augmented generation to summarize a bunch of the information from the websites that you've been to and give me a response. You can use that using its more basic model, 4.0. Or you can use a reasoning model to ask it like world questions and it won't be able to access the internet. DeepSeek, you can do both. Yeah, you can do both. It's sick. I was playing around with it. That is a huge game changer when you ask it a slightly more complicated question. Like, for example, DeepSeek has just been able to be built on at 3% of the inference cost, 1% of the training cost than NVIDIA. Is this an example of Javon's paradox, or does NVIDIA have a moat with CUDA? That is a question that you want something to search the internet
and think about
and give you like a big, long, reasoned answer with certain sources. And I asked it that question. It cites 50 different sources in its response.
Yeah.
No, like that is pretty impressive stuff.
Yeah, no, it's an impressive model for sure. And as you said, freely available.
For free.
And it's an open source model, so you can, I mean, not with the internet search, obviously, but you can run it on your own hardware, as we did last week on your M4 laptop. So anyway...
sorry, very, very quickly, someone was asked what exact specs I have. I got the M4 Max with 64 gigs of RAM is what I'm running. So it's close to the top of the line at the moment. To be realistic, in order to run a 70 billion parameter, that's like a $7,500 laptop. So it's not, you know,
it's not super accessible to everybody, but you know, you can probably run one of the smaller models on your laptop. So people figured out that it's actually very capable, and it's not just like, oh, they've done something that's really cool. Like they've done something that is pretty much at the bleeding edge of what these models can do, and they did it at a fraction of the cost. So the freakout came from kind of like two directions. Well, first, we're not going to get too crazily into what their paper and what they say they did, but one of the big things they figured out, which is what everyone is like, oh, this was actually like impressive, is something called like a mix of experts model, which basically, you know, in a normal ChatGPT or GPT, the current LLMs that are out there, you ask a question like, you know, what country has the most interesting coastline? And the whole model fires up looking for these connections between the data and the weightings and the parameters and what have you to find your answer. This one basically divides the task up, or divides the system up into many, many sort of like, I guess you could say, mini models within it. So
I should very quickly, the O1 model does this as well, but only 8. Like it divides it up into 8. It's like 1.6 trillion parameters, but it's like 8 different 200 billion parameter models or whatever.
Yeah. Whereas this can basically
It's heaps and heaps and heaps.
It's got a controller that can basically identify, okay, the user wants to know about coastlines of countries, which means I only need to trigger these quadrants of my
or JavaScript, and it's a JavaScript optimized kind of part.
The point is it's really optimized. It doesn't need nearly as much processing power or compute to get the same results. And to make something like that work, you basically you need a controller, quote unquote, I'm not using their exact language, that can identify exactly what needs to be done in an efficient way, and can work regardless of the input someone puts in. So it's a really big task.
Yeah.
And they've done it.
Yeah, another thing they apparently did that's worth mentioning, because this will relate to why NVIDIA lost $560 billion of market value, that we'll discuss shortly. But high bandwidth memory, which I think you've heard us throw around the term a bit, that is one of the elements of the CHIPS Act where China is not allowed to access this high bandwidth memory. What this basically means is and NVIDIA has made these H800s, which is the same as their Hopper 100s, like the top of the line chips, but without high bandwidth memory. It basically means you can't process as much data when you don't have high bandwidth memory, and the Chinese aren't allowed to use it. But interestingly, the DeepSeek team, they went deeper than CUDA. We've talked about CUDA, NVIDIA's software layer. They went deeper down to the foundational levels of actually programming, ones and zeros on the friggin' chip, and were able to change how it allocated memory in order to kind of optimize the memory allocations of these H800 chips, which is highly impressive. They went deep.
Yeah. No, it was
in order to rinse out these optimizations. And we mentioned last week, what does this say for the chip ban? I guess what it shows is within constraints, highly intelligent people become highly capable and make interesting optimizations.
Would you agree that constraints allow creativity?
Pressure creates diamonds.
That's absolutely true. Getting back to what I flagged before, the freakout sort of came from two dimensions. The first one was basically people within the AI ecosystem that were kind of it cannot be possible that they've done this.
Yes.
They cannot have done this. They must have illicitly gotten 50,000 top of the line NVIDIA chips.
Yeah. There's there's the bullshit crowd. That's
the bullshit.
And that's still an ongoing kind of thing.
Ongoing conversation,
And because I think that it is clear that at some point this hedge fund had access to H100s. But this model in particular, my personal opinion is I don't believe they did, because the detail that they go into in their paper on how they, as I just said, change the bare bones of these H800 trips. There's no reason to put that much detail into exactly the specific optimizations that do work, and then not use that.
And everyone I've seen who is credibly in this scene has read the paper and thought about it, said it's possible. It's clearly not bullshit. That doesn't necessarily mean that they haven't illicitly obtained or have access to H100s. There's plenty of evidence, circumstantial, out there to suggest that the US's ban on China getting bleeding edge hardware that's manufactured in Taiwan and where have you is not fully foolproof. I mean, one example that other people have bandied around is that Singapore is now the third or fourth biggest market for NVIDIA chips. Yeah,
there is 20% of chips go to Singapore.
20% of chips go to Singapore. There are some interesting AI and quant firms in Singapore. Don't get me wrong, they've got a very rich financial ecosystem. But let's be honest, a lot of those chips are going to China.
Yeah.
It's, Singapore is a gateway.
Yeah, I mean, let's be honest, I do love Singapore, I love my Singaporean friends and whatnot, but Changi isn't built on just the innovation of the locals. Let's be frank here. It serves a vital role in global commerce.
It's the facilitator. Lee Kuan Yew, he knew what was going on. Anyway, I have absolutely no doubt that Chinese AI labs, the Chinese government, whatever, have access to these chips.
Yeah,
probably not at the scale that they would like to.
No,
it's definitely
it's going to be a pain in the ass.
It's definitely working to an extent in hobbling them. But as we say, pressure creates diamonds. Regardless of the extent to which the chips are working, it has incentivized some big brain eggheads to figure out how can we push what we do have to the absolute limit. And it turns out, at least for now, that is to the very threshold of what the cutting edge labs are doing.
Yeah. And another thing worth pointing out, it's a fair criticism, is that they obviously used either ChatGPT or Claude in order to train their model.
Yeah, which is a common practice.
Common practice, yeah.
Like,
and we've mentioned it before in Down Round, like this is one of the issues with like being a leading edge AI model, is that everyone else is just going to immediately use your model to train their own model.
Yeah, like, I'm sure Meta's doing it for Llama. Mistral's doing it for their thing. That's why when you look at a lot of these like smaller open source models, you literally ask them, who made you? And they say, I am an AI created by OpenAI, because they haven't reinforcement learned that out.
Yeah. And people have pointed this out, and it's a fair point, though, I would say, including Mike Isaac, who was on our pod a fortnight ago, that OpenAI is very, very unhappy that DeepSeek is using OpenAI to train their models. You shouldn't use someone else's IP to train your models. As has been pointed out, quite ironic given they used all of our IP to train their models.
Yep, totally. How does it feel, Sam Altman? Anyway, yeah, there was the freak out from the AI scene, who were like, this is not possible, can't be done. As we've, I think, both teased out, I think it is possible. But, you can take a minimalist view on it and be like, this is a great innovation for making these models insanely more efficient, but it doesn't necessarily push it forward into new capabilities. It's sort of just matching what we already had, much cheaper, which, don't get me wrong, is insanely useful and is going to have wide effects. But it doesn't necessarily mean that whatever OpenAI comes out with next is not going to be another league ahead.
Yes.
So there's that.
But I mean, do we want to get into why there's a huge benefit though for just that in itself? Because I think it's worth discussing. Like, because I mean, what it means, I think, more broadly is ubiquitous AI. Like, if these things can run on the edge, quote unquote, like if you can have a Raspberry Pi in every friggin' room that has its running its own bespoke, that AI or whatever.
That opens up the use cases a lot. Or like on your iPhone, doing something far more powerful than...
Or like, with the Meta Ray-Bans, literally constantly filming every single thing you see. Or on your computer, something literally filming every single interaction that you have and passing it and setting it. If you have far more efficient models, this stuff becomes much more viable.
Totally. So it is, yeah, you're right. It's definitely useful. So yeah, there was the AI freakout from the community. There was the geopolitical freakout, which we actually kind of just talked about, which is that, is the chip ban working if they can...
which led to two different freakouts. There's one being like, oh, screw the chip ban. Like, all we're doing is stopping people like Chinese from buying NVIDIA, like paying NVIDIA more money and paying American companies more money. Just, get rid of it. Or / the opposite, like, we need to double down, ban everything.
We've got,
Chinese cannot have a single American thing.
Yeah, no, I don't think people have sort of figured out where the chips fall on that one. But, the general vibe has been, oh my God, all we've done is force them into the pressure cooker to make diamonds, which might be a bit of an overreaction. And then the third one was the third part of the freakout was what we saw, investor freakout.
Yes.
So we've kind of flagged that, there's been a little bit of investor unease about the massive capex that all these tech companies are undertaking to build out data centers. So that has been a feature of analysts and people that stand up at shareholder meetings and whatever and be like, why the hell are we spending billions and billions of dollars?
Well, I mean, we finished literally last week's episode for the premium subscribers. The end of last week's episode, and I double-checked this by throwing it through AI, we said, is this Stargate, is this $5 billion OpenAI...
$500 billion.
Sorry, $500 billion and Massa Sun... OpenAI, Sam Altman, Saudi Arabia, Oracle, you name it. Is the $500 billion thing even worth it if you have models like DeepSeek, which suggests that you don't need that much compute? That was like literally how we ended last week. And the market said, you're right, boys.
Every NVIDIA investor on Earth was listening to Down Round, and they all freaked out. So I apologize for the amount of value I took out of American pension funds. But yeah, no, they basically, I'm going to say freaked out a little much and overcorrected.
Yes.
And said, keep in mind these conversations have been happening for a while.
Yeah.
But they were like, if you can, exactly what you just said, if you can run these models for 3% of the inference costs, why the hell are you spending all this money on data centers. There's other considerations that come into it, but that's kind of like the big picture, the big line item. And as a result, yes, sell-off was huge. Nvidia, which has had it too good for too long, people wanted to see them knock down a peg, us included. They fell, and obviously,
anything to do with data centers.
Anything to do with data centers, and then just like a wider tech backlash, Magnificent Seven.
Yeah, well, except for, I will say, the two winners out of it were Apple and Meta.
Apple and Meta were one of the very few big tech stocks that did not take a pounding, basically.
Yeah. And there's two basic reasons for that. One, as again we mentioned last friggin' week, we were on this. See, the amount of alpha derived. If you'd listened to us and sold your Nvidia, we were saying...
I know we just told you there is no alpha, but, the quants are probably feeding our podcast into their fucking AI thing and then automatically actioning it through agent.
72 hours later. Yeah. Anyway, people were like, oh, hold on, if you can run this stuff locally, and actually it seems like M4s, as we talk about, and M4 is... And we should probably mention, one of the reasons why Macs in particular, the Macintosh chips... Macintosh. I don't know who said that.
The Apple Silicon, the M4s, M1s, M2s, M3s.
Yeah, the reason that they're particularly good is they have a unified architecture. It's a system on a chip. That is to say that the RAM, when we say 64 gigs of RAM, unlike in a computer where you have RAM that services the CPU and then the graphics card, your NVIDIA GPU for running your games.
Has its own RAM.
It has
its
own memory. The maximum you can get is like 32 gigs. On an Apple's unified architecture,
it's all shared.
It's all shared. So that's 64 gigs of RAM. If the graphics needs it, the GPU needs it, then the GPU uses it. If the CPU uses it, it's balanced, blah, 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 blah. So that means that on my machine, and you can get up to 128, on my machine, the GPU can access nearly 64 gigs of RAM if it needs to.
Yeah.
On the top of the line NVIDIA that you can plug into your computer, it's 32 gigs. Dedicated, because it's going to be dedicated. You can have as much friggin' RAM as you want in the rest of the machine, but it can't access it.
Yeah.
So that means that, and whether Apple kind of knew or lucked into this, or a bit of both, which is probably the most likely, they have found themselves in a position
where they've accidentally they have built the best consumer AI supercomputers, basically. And the unified memory thing, which other manufacturers try to do, Nvidia's thinking about it, Intel's thinking about it. It's actually really hard to do in a PC environment. Like, this is one of those things where it's like the walled garden of Apple, where it's locked down and you can't fuck around with the hardware you get, and it's all kind of like software hardware integrated. This is one of the just like nice little happy accidents that comes out of that. Anyway, so yes, the market was like, and analysts have been saying Apple's really well positioned here. Yes, Apple Intelligence is absolute
bust. I down round busted. I'm chucking
busted.
I wouldn't say that, big diversion, but Apple Intelligence, we did a whole episode on when we'd kind of been playing around with it for a week, a few months later. That is huge L. If they hadn't run a marketing campaign for 1 year where every single piece of collateral, I feel like almost the marketing strategy was at all times on our website, you should see the word Apple Intelligence. Doesn't matter where you are. Doesn't matter if you're looking at the specs of the CPU. Doesn't matter where you are.
It's got to be there. Yeah.
It's somewhere on the screen at all times. It needs to be Apple Intelligence. For what it delivers is a huge busted L.
Yeah. No, it sucks.
It sucks.
But classic Apple failing upward, as they often do. People looking at it like, the Apple Intelligence stuff is kind of dog shit. But the hardware is there, and now that we've seen a really performant small LLM, they're going to benefit from it. They can run it. It's open source. They can improve their own offering with their innovations. They're in a good spot. Meta, on the other hand, there's some ego damage to them seeing a Chinese lab, which by all accounts only has a few hundred employees total,
including a dude from Adelaide University.
Yeah, there's a guy on X who's a DeepSeek engineer who got his PhD at Monash University, actually. Wonderful. Love to see some Australian education output. There is some ego damage for Meta in seeing their enormous, well-funded laboratory getting smoked by some Chinese cowboys. And the information reported that it was like panic stations at Meta. They've created like 4 working groups. That's how you know shit's getting real. There are 4 working groups.
Because the question, and maybe we should get to this a little bit later, is like why American companies aren't able to optimize like this.
Yeah.
But yeah, there was a freak out at Meta, but regardless, their stock went up because, I mean, this is the down round thesis that we've actually said from very early days. Again, oh my god, the sheer amount of alpha is limitless.
We're tired of winning, folks.
I will actually discuss. I will get to a heart-to-heart and tell you a huge L. But we'll get to that later.
In the paid episode, we'll get to that huge L.
I recognise that not everything we say is genius. But regardless, as we've said all along, Meta win from the ubiquity of AI.
That's it. Meta spent the mobile computing era getting slapped around by Apple and Google. We've talked about, it was the very first down round episode, we talked about the app tracking transparency and whatever. They have been, like other companies, at the complete mercy of Apple's distribution through the App Store and Apple's cut of revenue, them being able to slam the gates down on app tracking, all this kind of stuff. Apple says jump, Meta is forced to say how high. They've tried to escape that in numerous ways. One of them is by building their own platform for VR.
Yeah, I mean, before that, they had their own mobile operating system.
Yeah, okay,
and phone.
No one remembers that. And in AI, they have clearly been like, this is going to be a big deal. We do not want to be a slave to Apple anymore. So the whole purpose of Llama, which is Meta's family of AI models, is we want to make an open source model that is freely available and people can build on top of, that matches the performance of the leading edge models and drives the cost of AI to as close to zero as possible, commoditizes it, so nobody is making money from the foundation models, and then we own the experience. We own the platforms where you share, I don't know, fucking AI-generated pictures of pregnant Wario. we own the endpoint, and we don't have to pay anybody a tax.
Yeah. And also it helps with like the ad network and ad distribution and creating content for ads, etc., etc. The developer ecosystem, if everyone's using PyTorch or whatever and using all of these like meta protocols and languages and whatnot, that helps them. It'll help them optimize their other, AI models that aren't public and blah, 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 blah. Like there's a whole bunch of network effects there.
So Meta, even though, the people who are on the Llama team probably got a dressing down from Mark Zuckerberg, who said, I've just become fucking right wing and aligned myself with Donald Trump, and now you've let China humiliate me. There's probably a bit of that going on, but at the end of the day, whether it's Mark Zuckerberg and Meta or whether it's a random Chinese lab driving the cost of AI down to zero, they win. They kind of win.
Here's probably a good point. We're going to do the same thing we did last week, and just cut it and we'll keep talking, and we're going to drop them at exactly the same time. So now's probably a good time to say I want to talk about like why American companies weren't able to make these optimizations. Why didn't they make it so much cheaper? We're going to talk about that. We'll talk about what is actually the truth with the implications of NVIDIA. Like, is NVIDIA worthless now?
Yep.
Or not? Is there some nuance there? And I'll talk about my huge L.
We'll talk about our huge L. So, if you've been on the edge of your seat, you haven't forked out for Dan Round Premium, you can hear Raf get serious with it. But this is the end of part 1 of DeepSeek.